If you are like me and you try and immerse yourself in sim racing 24 hours a day, 7 days of the week, you will quickly realise it's just not practical. Unfortunately, we all have responsibilities, and I try and look for different avenues of which I can exert my passion. One of those is reading. So in order to educate myself on the track, I try and grab resources from everywhere. So I've read a lot of motorsport books, educational, track guides, etc. And on my Amazon wish list, this popped up. So this is a book by a gentleman called Suellio Almeida, and I hadn't heard of this chap before. He runs a pretty big YouTube channel, he does a lot of sim racing coaching, and he's just released his first book, and I gotta say, it's pretty good. This is a Trauma Team Racing review of the motor racing book by Suellio Almeida, and we're going to find out, should you read it, and will this make you any quicker? Let's get into it. Before we start, I just want to run through the basic outline of this review. I'm going to go through a brief summary of the book as to what you should expect if you buy it and indeed read it, and then what I'll do is I'll talk about how that book affected me and how it affected my results and what I gained from it. Then we'll look at the strengths of the book, what it did well, and it wouldn't be a review unless we critiqued it, so we're going to look at the criticisms I have for it as well. After that, we'll go through my final recommendations, and that will be it. So what exactly is the aim of this book? Now, before I start, I will say I purchased this book with my own money. I have no affiliation with the author, and I did read it from front to back. Now, the most crucial thing about this book is that everything I've read around racing and racing technique has been adapted from motorsport. These are motorsport books we've had to adapt for our simulator. This is the first book I've actually read that is by a sim racer for sim racers, and in that respect, it makes it unique. What it does is its self-proclaimed task is that it sets out to elucidate some of the more complex technical aspects of racing technique and basically give you the building blocks to improve yourself. It goes through the things such as steering wheel technique, pedal position, your position while seating. It goes through some of the mental aspects, Suellio's own personal experience on the track, and he translates that to how it works in the simulator, and also his own coaching experiences, and also he uses that to kind of deconstruct it and come up with some common problems and pitfalls in order to help you get quicker on the track. And that basically summarizes the overall aim of the book, which is to provide a good foundation of the fundamentals for racing technique. So what do they gain from this book, and how is it going to affect my sim racing practice moving forward? Now, I will mention this book doesn't reinvent the wheel, and the things it is discussing, the techniques and concepts, are very much well established. But what you're getting is someone that's good at explaining things, perhaps explaining it in a different way to which you've heard it before, and that might just help it sink in. Now, particularly in my practice from an educational standpoint as a surgeon, if I'm learning a new procedure or concept, I will take lots of different resources and I'll read them and I'll amalgamate a good explanation from here and perhaps a slightly better explanation from over here, and ultimately help inform my overall knowledge. What it did get me to do is start engaging my brain, and I felt particularly over the course when I was reading the book, I was thinking more critically about what I was doing on track and ultimately how my inputs affected my outputs. The big question is, did this make me quicker? And that's multifactorial, and it's very, very hard to kind of pinpoint that down. But what I did find is I was approaching my racing in a much more academic fashion, and I was certainly thinking a lot harder about what I was doing. And ultimately, I felt I was getting better, and that's the important thing. So let's talk a little bit about this book's strengths. Now, the most important thing is that it's very easy to read. If you're going to sit down and read a book and drag somebody off the simulator, my opinion is that the prose needs to be digestible. There's definitely a little bit of room for improvement, but you've got to bear in mind this is his first book, and I think for his first book it's pretty good. It presents concepts in a nicely chunked fashion as well, so it aids itself to the cause of going away to the simulator, reading a little bit of the book, going back to the simulator, going back and reading a bit of the book, and so on and so forth. It does a commendable task of covering a lot of topics in a fairly condensed format in a short space of time, because a book can only be so big. And I didn't feel like it laboured on one topic in particular for too long. Some topics I did feel it could be a little bit longer, but overall I felt that the pacing of the book was rather good. I also think, as part of bringing the younger generation of sim racers perhaps into thinking more critically about their racing and not just binning it on Turn 1 Monza, it's as a book directed for sim racers by a sim racer. It might encourage some of the younger generation to perhaps pick up the book and start reading about some of the more advanced technique as well. If I can mention briefly just some of the criticisms I had with the book, I think its biggest weakness is that the author makes an active decision to exclude the beginner. Now, there's a quotation in the book which I'll bring up on the screen, which basically says that he's made an active decision not to explain basic concepts such as lip angle, to name a few, and he says that basically he didn't want to labour those points and you can go to Google to read them. However, I think that's a bit of a misstep because you've basically excluded the entire beginner market. Whereas, I'm not quite sure I want to go to Google and start reading things when I've got a book that's supposed to be a comprehensive guide. Now, that's just my opinion, but then again, this has been targeted, I think, at the intermediate to advanced, right? So from that standpoint, it does its job, but I would have liked to, perhaps the book could have been a little bit longer and include those concepts and be more inclusive from the beginner to the highly advanced, and then it becomes a more comprehensive guide. I do think within the book there is a little bit of an over-reliance on telemetry for explanation, and it assumes that the reader knows how to read it. Now, the only reason I do is because I've had to fiddle around with kind of things like Garage 61, shout out to you guys, I think you're awesome, and particularly their telemetry software, and you kind of train yourself to read it. But for the newbies coming in who don't know how to, it would have been nice for kind of a brief explanation or a bit of a guide as to how you get the most out of that and how you interpret it. So again, it assumes a certain level of knowledge. When reading the book, for the most part, I thought it was really well ordered and structured, but there were a couple of times where concepts were talked about within a chapter, and then in the following chapter it was met with, now I'm going to explain that concept, which kind of means you start to lose your reader from an educational standpoint. So I think just with a little bit more editing, it could have improved the educational flow of the whole piece, but these are small nitpicks. The final thing is very subjective to me, so some people might love this. I'm a big fan of a simplified diagram. I think it particularly explains concepts quite well, and a lot of the particularly explanations with regards corners and how to take them, entries and exits, etc., are done with screenshots from iRacing. Particularly the way they came out on my Kindle. They weren't particularly clear, and I was using this on like a high-def screen with the colour version, but I think some of the concepts could have been a bit easily put across with a more simplified schematic. But then again, the counter-argument to that is you can see the actual tracks and corners that you can go and do in the simulator, and you can go and execute them, so I think that's very much subjective and personal choice. So to finish things off, do I recommend this? And as long as you're not an absolute beginner with no knowledge of any racing concepts, I think this is a very, very good book. If you're a beginner, I think it runs the risk of losing you, but if you're intermediate to advanced and you know a little bit about racing and you crave a little bit more knowledge, I think this is very, very good. From an exciting standpoint, this is kind of a sim racing book by a sim racer, and then from that point of view, I think it should be commended. As to kind of its value, it can be purchased from Amazon, both on the UK and the US site, for I believe £39.99 or $39.99 United States dollars. That's the paperback. I do think that's a bit pricey. I do notice the book is self-published, so there's going to be publishing costs that are probably contributing to that. But the Kindle version is £9.99 or $9.99, and I do think that's a pretty good price. If you do wish to pick it up and you wish to support the channel at no cost to yourself, I will leave an Amazon affiliate link down below in the description. Ultimately, what do you think of the book? Have you read it? Will you be picking it up? Have you heard of Suellio Almeida before? Do you like his stuff? If you found value in this content, please hit the like button and consider hitting that subscribe button, and I will see you guys very, very soon. Take it easy. Bye for now.